Alright, so I wasn't expecting to do another video so soon after yesterday's, which if you haven't seen, I recommend. It was my thoughts on basically the ongoing state of Doctor Who and its constant need to completely reboot itself and its own continuity every couple of years, and how that's become damaging to the show's overall watchability for casual audiences. So if that sounds interesting to you, I'll leave a link to that in the top corner. But for right now, I wanted to talk a little bit about comments made today by Doctor Who producer Jane Tranter, one of the heads over at Bad Wolf, with regards to Doctor Who. She's done two separate interviews as far as I can tell, one for broadcast and the other with BBC Radio, so we're going to be going over those and kind of giving you my thoughts, because what she says is pretty interesting and kind of puts to bed a couple of bits of speculation that myself and other fans have engaged in, as well as actually respond to something we've covered in a previous video. So all that and more coming up. Feel free to like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe if you're new, that would be greatly appreciated. I'd love to get to 30,000. That's the final goal of this channel, is 30,000, and we're almost there. So any support would be appreciated, but let's dive right in. Doctor Who producer addresses series future, defends stories that reflect the world in which we live. I've had no sense from Disney Plus that measures up to what is being written about Doctor Who. While Doctor Who fans, obviously I'm taking this write-up from Radio Times, but the original quote came from broadcast. While Doctor Who fans continue to look forward to the new spin-off series, The War Between the Land and the Sea, which is expected to arrive next year, the future of Doctor Who remains in flux. The BBC has confirmed that the series will return with or without its production deal with Disney. That is true. That is something that I was very glad to hear when that happened a few months ago. But as we wait for news on that front, it remains uncertain when and in what form the show will be back. Now Jane Tranter, executive producer and founder of production company Bad Wolf, has addressed the continued speculation about the show's future in an interview with Broadcast. Tranter said, "What will happen next is between the BBC studios and Disney, and Bad Wolf certainly won't be the first to know. I take responsibility for a lot of things, but gloriously on this occasion, that one is out of my hands." The article notes that Tranter believes Disney's decision whether to continue the deal or not will be financially and algorithmically driven. Meanwhile, Tranter also reflected on the criticism that has been levelled at the show, with some viewers and media outlets labelling the show too woke. Addressing this, Tranter said, "In all honesty, I've had no sense from Disney Plus that measures up to what's being written about Doctor Who. All we can do is tell stories that reflect the world in which we live, not just some of us, but all of us." Showrunner Russell T Davies also addressed this topic earlier this year, saying, how basically people always bring up diversity, but he just calls it an open door. So yeah, essentially, this confirms a few things. One, obviously, it confirms that decision still hasn't been made as of today with regards to Doctor Who, but also obviously Jane Tranter's ruminations on why Disney may be delaying, and that it doesn't have anything to do with the commonly purported narrative that the show is too woke for Disney or whatever, which, that's something that I see quite a bit. In fact, in yesterday's video, which had nothing to do with this kind of topic, I had so many people talking about, the show being woke and stuff, even though the basis of my criticism had nothing to do with that. And similarly, I don't think the biggest issue with The Last Era was the fact that it was too woke. If anything, I kind of feel like quite often you'll have characters in the show that are of a certain minority that aren't really fleshed out. And I think that that's a bigger issue, rather than saying that them being there at all is the issue. I think the issue for me is that you'll have these characters who come in who only serve the purpose of reminding you that that's what they do and very little else. I think Rose Noble is the perfect example of that. The only time she's really mentioned is to make a point about people being, anti-trans. Similarly, even though I do love Reese Madley, I think it is worth pointing out that in pretty much every story she's in, there is a comment made about disability or stuff like that. And I kind of think that characters should be more than just their minority group. They should have a whole range of things going on, and that just so happens to be part of their personality. So that's my issue with that, is less so that there's people in it, because I really couldn't care less, and it's more so the execution would be my issue. But yeah, obviously she says that it'll be financially and algorithmically driven, which I think we all knew, but obviously this kind of implies that everything is still very much up in the air, like it hasn't been decided one way or the other. At least on Bad Wolf's end, they're still none the wiser, according to Jane Tranter here. However, this does, as William Who pointed out, kind of put to bed any ideas of secret continuations of the show with Billie Piper and such, which is something that I've kind of speculated on before. To clarify, I never thought that they were going to be filming with her like a week from now or anything. What I always said was the way that she was acting and the way certain things had been said led me to believe that maybe conversations were ongoing with Piper as to what they were going to do with her, and maybe that would involve Tennant in some sort of like final special or something like that. However, obviously this indicates that there is no sign of Doctor Who entering production again anytime soon, as they are still waiting on Disney. Obviously that also means that they won't be filming till at least late next year, as Billie is filming Wednesday Season 3 from April. So that's pretty much 2026 ruled out now. Yeah, so Billie Piper is said to be a major part of Wednesday Season 3. I watched the first 2 seasons, and her character is very much set up as kind of a new bad going forward in that show. So it's not like she has a minor role in that show. It seems like she's going to have a pretty large role in that show. So that's probably going to take up quite a bit of her time. So she's probably not going to be free to do much Doctor Who filming next year, even if they do get the go-ahead. And it's kind of ironic, really, because Billie Piper was seen as a quick fix to Gatwa leaving. And one of the key issues with Gatwa, obviously I loved him as the Doctor, but one of the key issues with him as the Doctor was his busy schedule. I just find it ironic that Billie Piper, as a quick fix, also seemingly is going to have that exact same issue when the show eventually does, get recommissioned or whatever. On a slightly more serious note, though, Jane Tranter has also hit back against quote-unquote rude writer who said sci-fi series is as dead as we've ever known it. Jane Tranter, the executive producer of Doctor Who, has bristled at the suggestion that the iconic sci-fi series is as dead as we've ever known it. The claim was made by Robert Shearman, who wrote Christopher Eccleston episode Dalek, and has penned several Doctor Who novels. Commenting in Doctor Who magazine, he argued that Season 15's ambiguous ending, when Ncuti Gatwa regenerated into Billie Piper's Rose Tyler, had, quote, put a full stop on things in a way previous season finales have avoided. The remarks also captured a mood of uncertainty around Doctor Who, with many unanswered questions over whether Disney will continue to co-produce the series, and if Russell T Davies and Tranter's Bad Wolf will remain involved in the BBC Studios' own show. Tranter mounted a spirited defence of the Time Lord when confronted with Shearman's quote, as dead as we've ever known it. That's really rude, actually, and really untrue, Tranter said during an interview with BBC Radio Wales on Friday. The plans for Doctor Who are really simply this. The BBC and BBC Studios had a partnership with Disney Plus for 26 episodes. We are currently 21 episodes down into that 26 episode run. We have got 5 episodes of spin-off series, The War Between Land and Sea, to come, and at some point after that, decisions will be made, together with all of us, about what the future of Doctor Who entails, Tranter said in an interview marking the 10-year anniversary of Bad Wolf. It's a 60-year franchise. It's been going 20 years non-stop since we bought it back in 2005, when I worked at the BBC. You would expect it to change, wouldn't you? Nothing continues the same always, or it shouldn't continue the same always, so it will change in some form or another. But the thing we can all be really clear of is that the Doctor will be back, and everyone, including me, including all of us, just has to wait patiently to see when and who. So yeah, very interesting stuff here. Obviously, we covered Robert Shearman's comments in a previous video, and I will say, I do think that Robert Shearman's comments have been taken wildly out of context by some of the journalists who've been reporting on them. It's been kind of framed as this thing of like, oh yeah, he's confirmed that Doctor Who has like lost the one thing that it always had, and it's like, no, not really. What he's saying essentially is that by having Billie Piper appear as this Doctor or whoever she is, it means that the spin-off media and stuff like that can't really continue the show in the same way that they did in the wilderness years with things like the VNAs and the audios and so on. So in that sense, he means Doctor Who is as dead as ever, because it isn't able to continue in any form. The long-running narrative of Doctor Who is put to a stop with Billie Piper, and of course you can tell stories with Ncuti Gatwa as the Doctor or whoever else is the Doctor, but they will always be old stories in that sense. They will not be the continuation of the show as it ended in Reality War, because that cannot happen so long as this Billie Piper question is up in the air. Equally, however, I can understand the frustration of Jane Tranter. It's understandable that everyone who's working on Doctor Who is probably incredibly frustrated right now that they, can't say anything, or, they don't know anything about, what's going to go on with the future. And of course, Russell and Jane and all of these people are going to be asked these questions constantly until we get an answer, in a few months or however long it is. So I can 100% see why her reading that in Doctor Who magazine might be seen to her as a little bit like, pouring fuel onto that fire. And I mean, it definitely did. I covered that quote, and, a lot of people covered that quote. But at the same time, I don't think Robert Shearman meant it in like a rude way. I think it's just that everyone is a little bit frustrated right now. Tensions are high, and I think that's kind of what's resulted. It's also worth noting that Jane Tranter said this on radio, on BBC Radio, so radio tends to be a bit more off the cuff and stuff like that, so that's worth considering when we talk about this quote, is she probably just saw it and went, yeah, that's a bit rude. I don't know whether there's any real, kind of depth of feeling there beyond that. So yeah, in the end, I just kind of feel like I get both sides of that. Like, I think Robert Shearman's point made a lot of sense. In the 90s, we didn't have a definitive, like, kind of stop point for the show, they walked off into the distance and stories could follow on from there. That is very much different to where the show has been left now, and in some ways that does mean that it's harder for it to really continue in any form, so long as that lingering question exists. However, I can understand from Jane Tranter's perspective that she is just as uncertain as the rest of us, and she might see it as a bit like uncourteous to bring this up. So I kind of get both sides. I think I lean more towards Robert Shearman because I don't think he meant it in any way that was kind of hostile, and I think it's kind of been ran with in a hostile way, which I just don't believe Robert Shearman meant it in. Obviously, she does say in this article that, the Doctor will be back and all of this sort of stuff, but it is interesting that she makes a point of saying, in what form and how, remains to be seen and stuff, and she says, like, it might change and other people might be involved in it, which seems to me like the door is very much open for, it not to be with the current team, with it not to be with Bad Wolf, with Jane Tranter, with Russell T Davies. That's on the table, as far as they're concerned. That could happen, that could not happen, to be clear. It could be the case that they are kept on, post a Disney deal or whatever. But it's interesting that that possibility and that option is very much on the table, and it'll be interesting to see if the BBC go with that or whether they do stick with the team that they've got. But that's about all I've got to say on this. If you enjoy it, be sure to give it a like, subscribe if you're new, and I'll see you later.